Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Karl Goulet, and I am the gallery director here at 5 Points. Both Real and Imagined and Mark Rich's solo exhibition is up through March 26th. 5 Points Gallery is open Tuesday through Saturday, 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. and Sundays 1 to 5 p.m. The show Real and Imagined explores dualities in the relationships of patterns and colors from the natural and imagined worlds. First off, we have Tamara Dimitri, whose work speaks to the variations in the environment she's lived in throughout her life. She's creating these organic branch-like structures, maintaining an awareness of the human footprint on our land, water systems, and atmosphere. Nancy Hayes creates intricately painted imagined worlds. Hayes's highly organized imagined ecosystems are dependent on how her brain organizes space, pattern, color, and form. Susan Sharp's Assemblage Series is comprised of panels utilizing different sizes, colors, and in some cases, depths and shapes. Both organic and geometric forms coexist in a world that is in continuous motion. Lisa Warren's Garden Galaxy paintings include abstract and representational elements. Her use of both shape, color, and mark making emphasize the emotional communication we all encounter in our own heads when exploring the world and our relationships within it. And lastly, we have Joan Wheeler, whose work creates conversations about the humans and their relationships with the environment throughout history and present day, focusing on flora and fauna and the hybridization between the two.
I'm Joan Wheeler, and I've done the 3 pieces that are now on the screen are in the show. They are sewn fiber art, and this is a relatively new part of my work. For years, I have been a painter. I've explored photography, creating tiny environments that I photographed. I've done encaustics. I've just worked in so many different types of materials. But starting in 2020, 2021, I moved to sewn art, and I started with this piece on the right. So that piece was the first sewn piece that I ever made. I have sewn my clothing my whole life. I learned to sew when I was a kid and just loved it. Asked my mother for a sewing machine for graduation from, I think, high school, and really had fun sewing my clothes. Then I let it go for years, and then as a teacher, I found that sewing my clothes, I could bring color and pattern and novelty prints to my students, who were very interested and paid more attention to class when I was dressed in that fashion. So during COVID, the beginning of COVID was very hard on teachers, and
Yes.
when we moved to in-person teaching, I decided not to continue teaching. So, and that was the time I started to make this shift to the fiber art. I felt that this represented my feelings about COVID, and it's all of these radial designs in the air are what the coronavirus, felt like to me. All around me were exploding particles ready to land on you. Don't know how well you remember the beginning, but it was pretty frightening. Really didn't know what was happening. And there's skulls in there representing my, constant fear of death. It was just a very scary time. And I had so much fun making this. It's about 3 by 4 feet. I started with a big blue piece of fabric. Finding the fabrics to express the different ideas is possibly the most time-consuming part of each project. It really takes a lot of searching and hunting and playing with fabrics, and I have so much fabric now. And one of the reasons I was interested in doing this, actually, the pandemic, the COVID picture, I was in the middle of a painting. I still have it sitting on my easel in the same room. I was painting myself, basically what you see here, but without any pattern. myself and some little nucleus of COVID, floating around in the air. And I just, in the middle of it, just dropped everything and said, if I do this with fabric, I can bring so much more pattern into it. And I love the idea of my skin will be a pattern and the background will be a pattern and every single thing will be pattern oriented. And it just brought to life the whole thing for me. This one, I love the artist Frida Kahlo, and I've painted her and I've done so many pieces about her, but I was particularly interested in her connection to the natural world. It is so strong and it comes through in so many of her pieces. And I created this piece, but again, it was I knew I wanted to make Frida, and that's as far as it went.
So I started out as a ceramic sculptor, and I worked in clay for 25, 30 years. I don't know how long I worked in it. And my mother had worked in clay. So I had like all these chemicals. I had two kilns, I had a wheel, a slab roller, I had all this stuff. I just put it all up on Craigslist. A young girl came with her truck and loaded it up, and that was the end of my ceramic career. And I had gotten far with it, but it was just, what was happening was I just felt like I was kind of, I was losing enthusiasm, and I really, really was drawn to color. And in clay, your color it's hard. It burns out in the firing and all of that. And I looked at what I call the ceiling, and that's my age. And I look up and I go, wow, how much time do I have left here on this earth? And as I really want to paint, and I had shared studios with what I would call painters. And I thought, I'm not a painter, like I'm not a schooled painter. But so I said to myself, who am I? Who am I going to be as a painter? Like I had no idea. I knew I wanted to paint. I had no idea what I was going to do or who I was going to be. And so that brings me back to what you were talking about, being self-taught. So it was really about finding who I was, finding myself. Well, if you look at my sculpture, it's a very easy jump. I mean, it's not like it's so much different than my paintings, but it was about really finding that security as to knowing who I was. Again, because to me, the painting world was painting on linen and oil, and there seemed to be tricks to it that I didn't know. And so anyway, it was an evolution, and it was an evolution to really honor how my brain works. And my brain is a kind of funny little thing. But I do like to tell the story as to why this is called Cataract Blast, because when I was in the middle of this painting, I had a cataract removed. And it was ironic because then all I could see was like this sense of blast. And when I came back to the studio, the color was so intense. I wasn't seeing the color as intense as it was. So it was a really kind of dramatic experience. The work in this show comes from different periods of that development. My work has evolved since the work in the show. I'm now working on cutout pieces that I literally cut out the forms. And it just, it's kind of gone back to that sculptural aspect. It's kind of like, I'm not saying it's a 360, but it's kind of turning a little bit, looking at the paintings more as objects, more as something that's a little bit more sculptural.
Part of the example I'm going to give you is where I happen to visit my family. So I went to Arizona, where I lived for a period of time in Lake Havasu City, Arizona. This is a city that was only founded in 1963, and it has the London Bridge, and it has now every lighthouse replica across the East Coast and West Coast that happens to line the shores of the lake, which the lake is an artificial reservoir. It's the Colorado River, and it has been dammed up, and it is now this lake. And so that's where, there's this duality about the beautiful natural landscape. But then as soon as we as people kind of like enter that landscape, we have choices to make and how we're going to be responding to the landscape. And I think, man-made intervention is, there's certainly a place for it. And I love the ingenuity of what we can do and what we can accomplish, but there's also the balancing act of preserving our space and our lands and the nature. So I'm constantly kind of thinking about that duality, but I also don't want to limit creativity. I don't want to limit what we can do and what we can achieve. But I find it almost humorous, the way that we build some of these spaces around us, and the fact that, some of our landscapes, are these kind of artificial spaces, all part of the same book. And I have intentionally, obviously, caught up and worked and manipulated the pages in such a way that most of it is random. At the same time, I will leave some intention of allowing a word to kind of peek through. So allowing some of the investigation to occur. And it was actually quite nice because I was talking or corresponding with a poet who happened to encounter this piece. And, so I did think about this a little bit more deeply after some correspondence with him. But when I develop my work, I'm already, well, now I'm Googling, but, in the past, pulling out the dictionary. But I'm always looking at terminology, especially as it pertains to life sciences, geology, and just the different elements that inspire me, seed pods, whatever it might be. And, I'm always looking for those words that spark something within me. So when I'm working with this, I intentionally love leaving some of that mystery of the word and allowing somebody to maybe come to it and say they found this, they found that, and maybe they create their own poetry, their own storytelling, because they're catching a glimpse of words that are sparking their own thoughts.
I love the title for the show, Real and Imagined, because a lot of these paintings began, the larger ones, so the top left and the far right, and then the bottom red and blue one, began at an artist residency where my references wouldn't pop up onto my computer, and I was away from cell signal and the phone, and I didn't have images. And I just said, look at me, I'm so dependent on technology. This is ridiculous. I have a beautiful space in the woods in Georgia. I need to make something out of nothing. So I wanted to see if I could create space just using color. So I see these quilt-like patterns, but I see each painting as creating like a galaxy or like a place in outer space kind of thing. And I liked the idea of the grid, but then having in this painting that's up right now, Love Bomb, I liked to have flowers, and, each mark creates a different location in space. And I didn't use much black and white, but there is some in there. The reason that I started to work with colors and shape to create these imagined worlds was that I had done a series of portraits, and I hit a wall with portraits because I kept doing people in my family, people close to me, but I just felt like I wasn't saying anything that I needed to take off from there. And so I tried to discern what was interesting about those paintings that were portraits. And I think it was the color and the pattern and the space. So I wanted to just make paintings out of abstract shapes. So these paintings, these larger ones, were from a show at Standard Space in Sharon, and it was titled Garden Galaxy. Then during the pandemic, I ended up being out of a studio space that I was accustomed to and in a smaller space. So I started to work on a small scale. When it out had a certain intensity at the show, and then the weaving light. So I titled the yellow painting Weaving Light because I was looking at a lot of textiles and thinking about weaving and how you create an imaginary world with just zero ideas, because I can attach narrative, and I fluctuate between narrative and storytelling and people and imagery. And I think that I wanted to just have the meditative quality of just process and repetition and not thinking about what my idea was that I wanted to depict. But at some point, I'd like to reintroduce the figure and have the definition of the space of the figures be abstract planes, kind of the way Picasso would break up the figure, but then use pattern or textures that create a different plane to the illusion of space. So I'm not thinking of Renaissance perspective, although if it happens accidentally that something's far away, I'll go with it. But I'm thinking of it as sculpture and form, and how color can create a box, or it can create light and shadow on a box, or in cylinders. And a painting for me doesn't really hold up unless that color exists in that way.
For years, I've been working on these panels. My retired lawyer husband worked his way through law school as a carpenter, so he's been building me these panels, and I like working on these panels. So from the very beginning, I started doing diptychs and triptychs. I like putting things together. And this new series, the Assemblage Series, this is a continuation of that. So my work a lot is about movement, connection, and this is, whoops. Yeah, and then this one here, I use, my son had, my architect son made that head shape, and I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I suddenly had an idea and I put that together. But you'll see that the panels all connect with one another, and it's very much about sort of going on a trip. I think each one is a different trip. And you go in and out and over and under, and the color also interplays with the shapes, and that's basically where I'm at right now. When I look back at some of my older work, I've been doing this kind of thing, putting forms together. And I like the idea of playing with the relationships of the different shapes. So the shapes they're organic. They relate to the organic world, but they're also geometric, linear. And I'm using very fluid paint. I use mostly oils, but I begin with acrylics and I layer. And in some instances, there's a real a sheen to the work. There's kind of an enamel-like surface. But I think all of that, just sort of creates this this world.
So from Erin Cunliffe, Nancy, the patterns in your paintings are so precise and seem incredibly planned out. What is the process behind them and the size of the brushes you are using?
Everybody always asks me that. I start a painting with very broad shapes where I put, day one, there's color everywhere. And I just kind of map out the composition. And then I like to, I liken it to turning a microscope, and you dialing in and dialing in. So as I'm working, initially there's color everywhere. I'm getting the form, and then I start going in, and I say it's like finding the biology. So it's like kind of so I'm asking the question to the painting. We're having this conversation, and I'm going, who are you? What do you want to be? And so it's kind of a call and response in an odd way, and it develops one step at a time. So it's not like I map out the composition's all mapped out, but the biology of each form is not. That comes one step at a time. And it's as if, as I lock onto one form, it tells me what the next form wants to be, if that makes any sense. One form tells the next form what to be. I use, hold on. I use really small brushes. You can't see this, but once I've gotten the whole big thing, the brushes get smaller and smaller. This is a number 2, I think. And that's where, that kind of Zen-like thing starts happening. And that's part of the process. I really love when I get into the little details.
Thank you.
I hope that answers the question.